turbulent political and financial times are pushing the dollar up recently, but it's not just the dollar that is strengthening. The shekel is also weakening and losing its value against the dollar. Today, it stands at around 3.44 shekels to the dollar. For more on that, we're joined by Chen Herzog. He's the chief economist for BDO. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Hello.
We do want to understand what is causing the currency's volatility and also the projections, of course, for the next year. So first of all, what is making the dollar climb so much against the shekel, and not just against the shekel, against the euro and almost every other currency?
Well, I think there are two factors here. One, we're in a situation of global financial crisis, and in periods of crisis, traditionally, people move to the dollar, which is perceived as a safe haven, the more secure currency. But on top of that, we have the interest rate policy. The Fed has raised the U.S. interest rate very rapidly, faster than European or Israeli central banks, which means that if you buy dollar, you win twice. You get higher yield, higher interest rate, and less risk. And those two factors together push the global exchange to buying more dollars. And as you buy more dollars, the dollar strengthens and the other currencies are devaluated.
And we're seeing a graph there of the shekel against the dollar in the last 10 years. It's a long period of time. March 2015 was the last time that the dollar was over 4 shekels. Is this, you think, in the horizon in 2022 or 2023?
So you have to keep in mind that for many years, the Bank of Israel actually wanted to devaluate the shekels. And the Bank of Israel purchased billions of billions in dollars in order to support the devaluation of the shekel, but did not succeed. So is this good news or bad news now for the economy that we're seeing the devaluation after so many years that we waited for that, or the Bank of Israel? So it's good news for the Israeli industry because Israeli exports to the U.S. are more competitive. It's bad news for us as consumers because imported goods that are imported in dollars are more expensive. And this is, I think, some of the concern of the central bank now, that inflation is so much of a global concern, a local concern, that the devaluation of the shekel is pushing imported prices higher. Everything that we import will be more expensive. This pushes up inflation, and this is a concern.
What are you seeing with regards to investors' behavior here in Israel? Are people also here in Israel flocking to the dollar?
Yeah, I think this comes at the time that we also have a crisis in the high-tech sector. So generally, this was a sector that has moved dollars incoming currency into the country, and the situation is a little bit shifting now. And of course, Israeli investors as well see higher yield in the US dollar. So no doubt there is a tendency to buy or to prefer dollars over shekels, also for the Israeli economy.
Now, Chen, before we part, I do want to ask you, we are standing before yet another election round, the 5th in just a couple of years. How is the identity of the new government going to impact the strengthening of the dollar against the shekel? Or is it the Bank of Israel that, regardless of who is in power, will take the decisions and will follow the decisions of the Fed and probably increase the interest accordingly?
So the Bank of Israel is, of course, independent, has independent policy, but the next government is very important to fight the overall, or to deal with the overall crisis. We are dealing with a situation of, on the one hand, inflation that promotes the central bank to raise interest, but on the other hand, of economic slowdown. And we really need a new budget, a new government that will be able to tackle with these challenges. On the one hand, fight the increasing standard of cost of living, that we want to avoid inflation, but on the other hand, avoid a situation of economic slowdown. This is a major challenge for the next government.
Okay. One last question, and really briefly, because we have to part very quickly. You mentioned the startup scene in Israel and what a difficult year it is, second part of the year maybe, for the high-tech sector. You think we're going to see a lot of Israeli companies going down by the end of the year?
I think the high-tech sector has entered this crisis very strong after a very large successful IPOs and fundraising. And I think, yes, in a way, the weaker will not survive, but the stronger will emerge even stronger from this crisis. So I think it's not necessarily bad news.
Chen Herzog, Chief Economist for BDO, thank you very much for joining us today.